There is a moment that happens in almost every Rogue owner's driveway, usually somewhere around the second winter. You start the car on a cold morning, you pull out of the driveway, and right around 2000 RPM, there's this faint shudder, a hesitation, almost nothing, the kind of thing you'd dismiss if a friend mentioned it. Most owners do dismiss it, and then, somewhere between 60,000 and 90,000 miles, that faint shudder becomes a $3,500 to $5,000 repair bill, and a used Rogue with a blown transmission becomes almost impossible to sell for anything close to what the book value says it's worth. That's not a rumor. That's not a YouTube exaggeration. That's a pattern that's been documented for over a decade, and it's still happening in current generation Rogues. So before you sign anything, I want to walk you through exactly what that pattern is, why it keeps happening, what Nissan has and hasn't fixed, and where the real value actually is in this lineup. Because there is real value here. I'm not going to waste your time pretending otherwise. Let's get one thing straight before we go further, because I know how these videos usually go. This isn't a hit piece. The Rogue is the best-selling vehicle in Nissan's entire US lineup, and it didn't get there by accident. It's roomy for its footprint. The base trims are genuinely affordable in a segment where affordable has become a joke. The seats are comfortable on long drives, the visibility is excellent, and for a huge number of buyers, especially people who just want a vehicle that gets them to the grocery store and back without drama, the Rogue does that job fine, for years. I'm not here to tell you Nissan builds garbage. I'm here to tell you what the people who've owned one for 5 years actually know, and what the showroom conversation conveniently skips. Reason 1 is the transmission, and I'm not burying this at the bottom of the list, because if I did, this video would be lying to you by omission. Nissan has used a continuously variable transmission, a CVT, across nearly its entire lineup for close to 20 years. And the Rogue has been at the center of that story, more than almost any other model. The complaints follow the same script every time. Shuddering at low speeds, hesitation when accelerating from a stop, a whining or humming noise that gets worse with heat, sudden loss of power on the highway, sometimes described by owners as the car going into limp mode, with no warning. This isn't one bad model year. Owner complaint databases show clusters of these reports, running from the 2013 model year all the way through recent Rogues, and that's the part that should stop you before you sign. This isn't ancient history Nissan quietly fixed a decade ago. And here's the part that turned an engineering problem into a legal one. Nissan has settled multiple class action lawsuits over CVT failures, including a nationwide settlement that extended warranty coverage on affected transmissions, because the failure rate was high enough and consistent enough that a judge signed off on it. When a car company settles a class action, instead of fighting it, that tells you something the marketing brochure never will. It tells you their own lawyers looked at the data and decided a courtroom was the more expensive option. But here's the detail that almost nobody puts together, and it's the reason this problem never fully went away. Fixing a CVT doesn't mean the replacement is bulletproof. The extended warranty coverage Nissan offered typically ran to 84 months or 100,000 miles, on the CVT specifically, longer than the standard powertrain warranty. That sounds generous, until you realize what it actually signals. Car companies don't hand out extended coverage on parts they trust. They hand it out on parts they're managing. And once that clock runs out, whether you bought the car new or picked it up used with 70,000 miles already on the clock, you inherit the exact same transmission, with the exact same design, and none of the safety net. Reason 2 is what happens when that transmission actually fails, because the number people expect is never the number they get. A CVT replacement on a Rogue commonly runs between $3,500 and $5,500 installed, depending on the year and whether you go through a dealer or an independent shop, and that's before you factor in the tow, the rental car, and the week or two you're without a vehicle while the part gets sourced. Compare that to the kind of transmission work you'd expect on a conventional automatic in a comparable Toyota or Honda. where a full rebuild is often cheaper and a straight replacement is less common in the first place, because the failure rate simply isn't the same. This is where the math starts to matter to guys who've owned a few cars in their life. A $28,000 SUV that needs a $4,500 transmission repair at 75,000 miles isn't a $28,000 SUV anymore. It's a $32,500 SUV, and you didn't get a say in when that second payment came due. Reason 3 is the reliability data itself. And I want to be fair here, because Nissan as a brand doesn't score at the very bottom of every study, and it would be dishonest to tell you it does. But in Consumer Reports' predicted reliability rankings, Nissan has consistently landed in the bottom half of mainstream brands, and the Rogue specifically has drawn below-average marks tied directly to transmission and drivetrain categories in multiple recent model years. J.D. Power's dependability studies tell a similar story, with Nissan trailing well behind Toyota, Honda, and Mazda in problems reported per 100 vehicles. None of these numbers say catastrophe. They say something more frustrating for an owner, which is inconsistency. You might get a Rogue that runs clean for 150,000 miles. Your neighbor might get one that eats a transmission at 68,000. That unpredictability is itself the risk, and it's a risk that Toyota and Honda buyers, statistically, simply don't carry to the same degree. Now here's something that almost never comes up in the sales pitch, and it should, because it's the difference between a repair you can plan for and one that ambushes you on a random Tuesday. Reason 4 is resale value, and this is where the transmission reputation quietly follows the car into the used market, whether the specific vehicle in front of you ever had a problem or not. Because CVT failures are so well documented across the Rogue's history, used car buyers and independent appraisers have gotten cautious, and that caution shows up in the numbers. Kelley Blue Book and Edmunds data consistently place the Rogue below comparable Toyota RAV4 and Honda CR-V trims in projected resale value after 5 years, sometimes by $2,000 to $3,000 on similarly equipped vehicles. That's not a small gap. That's real money leaving your pocket the day you decide to sell, for a reputation that may not even reflect the specific car in your driveway. A RAV4 owner with a bad transmission is treated by the market as an outlier. A Rogue owner with a bad transmission is treated by the market as a statistic. That distinction is unfair to the guy who took great care of his car. It's also exactly how used car pricing works. Reason 5 is the part dealerships genuinely don't want you thinking about at the moment you're deciding on an extended warranty, which is timing. Most Rogue CVT failures cluster in that 60,000 to 100,000 mile window, which lines up almost perfectly with when a lot of owners are just rolling off their original factory warranty, and right around when a lot of used buyers are shopping specifically because the price has finally dropped into their range. If you're buying used, and a huge number of you watching this are, you need to know exactly where that Rogue sits on the mileage clock before you fall in love with the price tag. Because the price tag on a Rogue at 85,000 miles looks fantastic, right up until the moment it explains why it looks so fantastic. Now, here's what Nissan actually does right, because leaving this out would make this video exactly the kind of one-sided garbage I told you at the start this wasn't going to be. The Rogue's interior, especially in SL and Platinum trims, punches above its price point. The materials feel genuinely upscale for the money. The ProPilot Assist driver aid system is one of the more capable systems in the segment for the price, and the standard safety suite across the lineup is comprehensive, without forcing you into the top trim to get it. Fuel economy on the standard engine is competitive. Cargo space is class-leading in some configurations, and the base MSRP consistently undercuts the RAV4 and CR-V by a meaningful margin, sometimes $1,500 to $2,500, depending on trim and incentives. If you're cross-shopping on sticker price and features per dollar at the moment of purchase, the Rogue wins that specific fight more often than it loses it. The problem was never what you get on day 1. The problem is what you might be signing up for on day 1000. I want to pause here for a second, because if this is the kind of thing you actually want to know before you spend 30 grand, that's specifically what this channel does every week, and right now most people watching this haven't subscribed, which means the algorithm has no idea you're the kind of buyer who wants the real story instead of the showroom version. If that's you, hit subscribe now, because the next video like this one is going to a stranger instead of you otherwise. Reason 6 is the part that ties all of this together, and it's the recall history, which tells a story the sales floor conveniently forgets to mention. The Rogue has been subject to multiple recalls tied to the transmission and related drivetrain components over the years, on top of separate recalls for things like fuel pump failures and airbag issues shared across the broader Nissan lineup. Individually, recalls happen to every manufacturer, and I'm not going to pretend Toyota and Honda have never issued one. But when you stack the CVT class actions, the extended warranty program, the recall history, and the below-average dependability scores on top of each other, you're not looking at 4 unrelated data points anymore. You're looking at one company's transmission strategy playing out across an entire model line for the better part of 2 decades, and the current generation Rogue, redesigned as it's been, still uses a version of the same fundamental CVT architecture that built that history in the first place. And that's really the question you need to answer honestly before you buy one, not whether the Rogue is a bad vehicle, because it isn't, but whether you're the kind of owner who's going to keep this car past year 6, past that 60 to 100,000 mile window where the risk concentrates. If you lease, if you trade every 3 years, a lot of this simply never becomes your problem. It becomes the next owner's problem. And that's worth being honest with yourself about too. If you're the guy who keeps a vehicle until it owes you nothing, who does his own oil changes and expects a car to still be running strong at 150,000 miles the way his last Toyota or his father's old Accord did, the Rogue is asking you to take on a specific, well-documented risk that those other vehicles simply don't carry to the same degree. And no amount of interior quality or driver assist tech changes what a CVT failure at 75,000 miles does to your bank account. Here's the honest way to think about this. A Rogue isn't a bad decision. It's an informed decision that requires you to actually be informed. And most buyers walking onto that lot aren't, because nobody behind the counter is going to volunteer a class action settlement number while they're sliding the finance paperwork across the desk. If you buy one new, get the extended CVT coverage and use every mile of it. If you buy one used, get a transmission fluid service history before you hand over $1. And if the seller can't produce one, treat that silence as an answer. Have an independent mechanic scan it for the specific shutter codes tied to this transmission before you sign anything, not after. The Rogue isn't the villain in this story, and it isn't the hero either. It's a genuinely competitive, well-equipped, fairly priced SUV, built around a transmission that has quietly cost thousands of owners thousands of dollars. And the company that builds it has known that for the better part of 20 years, and kept building it anyway. Because on paper, in a showroom, under fluorescent lighting, it still drives fine. The bill just doesn't come due until you're not looking anymore. If you found this useful, do me a favor and subscribe, because next week, I'm breaking down exactly which model years had the worst of these transmission failures and which ones Nissan quietly fixed. And that's the kind of detail that can save or cost you $5,000 depending on whether you know it walking into the dealership. See you in the next one.